Hi, this is Eli Ochiltree of the SnoKing Beekeepers Association. This is our third Wednesday monthly meeting on September 20th, 2023. And we are going to go ahead and start with Ty Carlson's report. His presentation of his research he did to get his master certificate. And there it is on the screen, the Master State Beekeepers Association certificate. So I'll let Ty go ahead and I'll kind of watch chat for questions. Okay.
Sounds great. Okay, just to start off, this is one of the very interesting projects I undertook in the last year to be able to go forward. I'll give a little background here. Here's the agenda. Just an intro, kind of how insulation became an important topic for me, my results through this last winter, and then what I did with the research project, and some details on that and the road ahead. And I'll just kind of move kind of quickly. My background, just so people know where I came from. I grew up in a dairy farm in Arlington and had about 300 head of cow. Then I went to PLU and my degrees in engineering, physics, and computer engineering. I went to Microsoft, was an architect there, spent 25 years at Microsoft, basically 12 years on Windows, 8 years in semiconductor space, and then 5 years on Office 365. But this was the original Windows was one of my original projects that I worked on. At Amazon, I moved to Amazon and I was a senior manager of the technical program management team for Alexa. So that was a very interesting V1 project. And then I was asked to be a co-founder for Pattern Computer, which I've now been 7 years as a chief technology officer. And we work to identify patterns behind cancer and other very high dimensional spaces to be able to identify the factors and the causes behind these type of big data projects. And so we are developing therapies for example, for ovarian cancer is one of them. Currently reside on a small horse farm on Lord Hill in Snohomish, not too far away from Eli. Married, 2 daughters, one's at Wazoo, the other's a senior at Inglemoor. And other interests, private pilot, single engine land and AMP certificate, scuba diving, and then long distance cycling. But I've been out of that for a while, primarily because of the bees. It's kind of taking a lot of time. Best laid plan. So how did I get into it? Just to give you a quick summary, this was a bit of an adventure. 15th of January of 22, I ordered 3 8 free medium nukes and paid for them. On the 22nd of January, I ordered 4 10 frame medium hives. I set them up in March. April, I got to a date for a bees, and I asked Kathy Cox, I said, hey, when can we get bees? And she came back with a very terse, too cold for queens to mate yet. It's like, okay, I'll wait. But June, I waited, and then in the 1st of June or 2nd of June, I was like, any update, please? And Kathy came back saying, we've had a massive loss, queens, the bees are getting wet. You're gonna have to, we might seek other options. So I contacted Eli and she said, hey, why don't you contact Dan and Judy Harvey out at Olympic Wilderness Apiary. And I reserved 4 medium nukes there. And thank goodness. The nice thing was on 9th of July, I went out and picked them up and drove back with the nukes, sitting in the back seat and brought them home. So this is the Olympic Wilderness Apiary. This is Dan and Judy's place. They raise Russians. And the interesting thing here is they primarily overwinter with small hives. And they basically have 2 to 3 sheets of reflectix that go front to back over the hive. And then they have 5 sheets of reflectix insulation that goes over left to right. And then as you can see, they throw the cinder block on top. And so that's how they manage their bees. And so when I went to pick up the bees from them, they basically informed me that what we do is, we recommend that you insulate your bees. And so he sent me this little note along with them saying, here's what we do with our bees. By the way, I'm happy to share this text. Don't worry about writing anything down. But they, solid bottom boards. They use 1.5 inch foam board under each bottom board. So they're insulating basically top and bottom, and that's how they get through the winter. And I was like, that's really interesting. So I make a note of that. And of course, bringing them home in my truck, it was very interesting, of course, having the bees sitting in the nukes in the back, but brought them home and set them up. These are the 4 hives, and then I had the nukes sitting alongside them for a day to familiarize themselves, and then place the nukes in the boxes along with brood minders, and away we went. The basic premise behind insulation, and this is, as I come back from Olympic apiary, and I'm like, I wonder what it's going to take to insulate the hives and whether I should. Dan was pretty focused on it, and he said he's been doing it 30 years and he knows something about what he's doing. And it's like, So I started reading up on it. And, the basic premise behind insulation is the bees have historically sought out and lived in tree cavities or cavity type arrangements. And so how could we create a tree-like home, and what would the characteristics of that be? And so the tree trunk, I looked that up, and as part of this questioning, was that a 6-inch softwood tree, if you said it was 6 inches, and you have an 141 R value per inch, that would give you an 8.46 R rating for 6 inches of softwood. And if you had a hardwood tree, you'd have an equivalent of R4. Of course, trees won't have upper ventilation because they're basically the one access to the canopy, and there's no airflow. And then finally, the humidity is managed by the bees as they're controlling the entrance to the hive. So this was kind of an interesting approach. It's like saying, okay, well, they don't have upper ventilation, and so that's kind of puzzled me. Dan had said to me, he says, you need to go read the Derek Mitchell paper. So along with the information that he provided to me, he said, here's a link to the paper and something you should read about insulating bees. And the summary of the paper is that the original kind of documentation around 1943 regarding the bees was that they did a simple test and had a 15-watt bulb and placed a thermometer in the hive. And basically, whether it had a single entrance or 2 entrances, he didn't see any appreciable difference in the temperature of the hive. And therefore, it was like, well, upper ventilation doesn't really matter. And so Derek's paper goes in to kind of question that kind of assumption, basically saying a 15-watt bulb and with a thermometer placed so far away wasn't really going to accurately represent the thermals that you might see in a hive. And so he kind of modeled this. His background is in engineering and in thermals. And he basically said, when you have a hive and you have no insulation and no vent, you get a warm heat pool. And the heat pool builds up, and you lose some heat by convection, but you would maintain your temperature, and you'd have no ventilation. If you have an upper ventilation, then you you still have your warm heat pool, but the heat is going to be lost via the vent. And part of the challenge here is that you have a warm heat pool, but it's not hot. And the difference is whether you're reaching the dew point inside the hive or not to cause that rain effect going on. And so by not having insulation, you're warm, but you're not hot. The difference being that if you do insulation and you have no vent, as shown here in figure 3A, now you have a hot heat pool, and it is sealed with only 1 entrance. And now you are keeping the temperature up high enough so that you're above the dew point, and that you can now have a warm area in your hive. And this is oftentimes where you put 2 layers of insulation, for example, up on top. If you do have it insulated and you have an upper vent, then you have a smaller hot heat pool, and you're creating a bit of a thermal draft or chimney effect through the hive. And so that could lead to problems. And again, you have a risk of dew point and then rain situation going on as well. Then the observation he also made was, if you have an uninsulated hive and you move the vent, if you have a single vent, then you'll have the cold space basically to the level of where the vent is. And if you keep lowering the vent down, the warm heat pool will only have so much space up above. And so at some point, lowering it down, it won't have any appreciable effect on the overall heat of the hive. And so there's a paper that we can readily make available. This is something you can also find out on the net. But, you know, the observation being the condition of cold condensation raining down on the bees only occurs in hives with high heat loss. Moist air is possible without condensation if the hive is insulated so the surfaces above the bees are above the dew point. So that's kind of a key observation of this paper, and the work's been going on. And Derek Mitchell has published a number of papers related to this that you can easily find as well. So this one was from the American Bee Journal from April 2017. So that's available. So there's another, so I'm sitting here thinking about this and I'm going, okay.
Can you go back to the
Okay, so I was thinking of this, of different options. I went on YouTube and I was looking at what other people are doing. And the guy named Jim at Vino Farms is really kind of an interesting character. And he's basically put kind of the history of beekeeping, of his beekeeping experience on the web and on YouTube. And so you can watch as he, you know, tries various modes and tries various things. And, you know, has situations with varroa mites and all kinds of things. But he went through a phase where he was working on insulation, and his first strategy was insulate the hives. And so he came up with this design to insulate the hive using three sides of 2-inch rigid foam. The good part was it insulated the hives. It was a good thickness of rigid foam. It folds so that if you take it off, you can actually lay it down flat. And he had an insulated top cover. The bad part about this, at least in my opinion, is he's got an open side. You know, it's like having a garage door you don't insulate or something. Jim goes on to make bee barns, and I'll show you a picture of that later on. But he continues to make some interesting approaches regarding different creative designs for beehives. And it's worth reviewing, worth noting. But this is an image that he presented. He's out in Massachusetts. And so he had this awning to keep the bees dry. And he felt that this was going to, you know, be a solar collector type thing, keep the bees warm from this. And I never understood that. But that was his first approach. So then he went and created another design from this. And I was really interested in this part of the design because he insulated from below. And we're on Lord Hill, we have quite a bit of wind that can happen in windstorms and such. And there's a lot of wind that can move below the hive. And what I liked about this was that I could have insulation below. And so he had this simple design that allows you to, you know, set the individual hives on it. And then you have an area below this that's insulated, which was nice for me because it allows me to set a box onto the stand, because I also use them to offload when I'm working the hive. And there's an open area for the bees to be. So if I have things dangling beneath it and they're hanging below the frame or festooning, whatever they're doing, I can move it there and not crush the bees. So that was nice. So this is an interesting design. The only thing about this design that I didn't like was it has gaps here on the side. If you're really going to try to insulate and insulate well, you want to really lock that down. So I came up with this design. It doesn't have any gaps in it. It's very, very heavy and solid and sturdy. I love this fact of it because when I'm working with the hives or something like that and I'm moving boxes, the stand doesn't move with me. You know, it stays where it is, and it's very, very stable. And then I can also catch any bees or anything like that. And when I move a box onto it, I don't drop queens or things like that because everything drops onto the insulation and I can see and inspect what's going on. So the first thing I decided was like, I'm going to have insulated stands for the hives for a couple of reasons. One is when I had my bee stand laid out in the garden, we're in a fairly tight space, and it was really hard for me to move around the hive. So I was always walking around the end of the row of hives. This allowed me to move in between the hives. It also allowed me to be able to then insulate beneath the hives, so that was good. And the other thing that it allowed me to do was then individually, have the hives balanced individually. So, Eli said, well, you're going to have to keep them balanced. And indeed you do, but I don't have much trouble with them. They're heavy enough and they stay fairly stable. So that worked out fairly well. So I closed the gaps here and made a solid frame. And these are the dimensions of it. And I'm happy to share if anybody wants them. The other thing I did was I built some additional stands for them out of old fence rails. And these are the stands that I use, and I've got insulation underneath them. This was just when I was building it. I use these old stands as places to park my boxes when I'm moving. So the beehives themselves stay on these nice new ones, and then I just use these old fence rails, and they work out really well. So the way that I set it up to be able to create hives that were insulated was to first insulate from the bottom, but I also had brood minders. And so I had the brood minder scale, as you can see here, the brood minder scale, and then the temperature sensors. So I placed the scale on the front edge of the stand, and then I used the Speedy Metals angle bracket to support the back of the stands. And so this is how the configuration works. I did add a little block in here at the front of this, because while everything fit, I found myself keep dumping the brood minder into the insulation area. And we've got a box full of bees and you've got the stands and stuff. It was happening too frequently. So I just put a little, ledge there, and now that solved that problem. So in winter 2022, here were the hives, Mount Baker, Whitehorse, Glacier Peak, and Mount Rainier going into winter. I didn't get them all insulated because I simply ran out of time. It takes a while to build all these stands and get everything else built. And I was taking a bunch of bee classes, as Eli knows. So this is how we headed into the winter. And here's my daughter with honey frame. So I had the insulated beehive stands with the broodminder sensors. Whitehorse, Glacier Peak, and Mount Rainier were in good shape, but I had to add 2 frames from each of from Glacier Peak and Mount Rainier, gave them to Mount Baker because they were low on honey. So I wanted each to have at least 10 frames of honey. And so Mount Baker was the hive that was behind. The report coming out of winter 22 of last winter, Glacier Peak, Mount Rainier, and Whitehorse was strong. Mount Baker, they survived, but I could see the bee count going down. I could see the temperatures and stuff dropping. They're starting to drop, and then the last cold snap took them out. So I lost Mount Baker. So that was my motivation for continuing with the insulation work. Spring and summer this year, I added 3 nukes into the system, and so I ended up, that took me to 6. I then created 2 additional splits because these 2 hives at the end, Mount Baker and Glacier Peak Glacier Peak and Mount Rainier were taking off, but I didn't give them enough nurse bees, and I didn't have time to pay close attention to them because I spent 2 weeks watching over my mom in the emergency room. So I, had to prioritize what I could do. But as I got back, we had 4 swarms. Whitehorse split twice. And we captured all 4 swarms, and then working on the new Queens project with Eli with the apiary as part of the SKPA grafting project, added on 2 additional ones, and that takes us out to 12. And so this was the apiary, and then here's all the new stands that I just built with the hives that were waiting to be moved onto the individual stands. And of course, as many people are very familiar with, when you're dealing with your swarms, you typically have a couple of ladders going to nowhere, and the hives supporting the new bees. So the insulation strategy was hive insulation all around. So this is the basic hive configuration: 3 mediums, inner cover, top feeder, and then it had 2-inch internal insulation, and then insulation on top. So with insulation inside of 2 inches of rigid foam, and then with this top rigid foam, I have 4 inches of insulation on the top. This foam is just going around the outer edge of the top cover, and then this is 2 inches of rigid foam all the way around the hive, and I support it by just a strip of insulation at the bottom, and it just rides on top of that. Here's a couple of notes that are interesting. This is the foam. It's Home Depot. About $50 a sheet. Not so fun at that. And by the way, keep it away from chickens. They love to eat that. Then I use how to cut it. I used a masonry diamond blade. If you try to use normal saws and stuff like that, you're going to be in a snowstorm of purple foam and everything, and it sticks to everything, and really a miserable experience. You can also use, there are a couple of knives that you can use that are extended sectional knives that you can use to cut as well. And they work pretty good. But boy, I tell you, the masonry blade, it melts it as it cuts through it. And so you get this really nice edge. It's clean, it's crisp, it works. So if you're ever thinking about doing this, at least that worked for me. A good glue for the rigid foam. The foam is also difficult to be able to stick to various things. And so I used the foam fusion glue that was recommended on the internet, and they did a bunch of tests of the various kinds. It did work very, very well. So this worked effectively. The zip system flashing tape, one side used to tape the corners and be able to make it so you could then collapse and fold the pieces together. And then the 3M78, this was a special order, but it is specifically for foam insulation to stick on like Velcro or hook and loop things, so that when you close your when you close the hive up, it will close and stay that way. So just to give you an image of what this is so here are two side panels, and here's the front and back panel. So you just cut them at a 45-degree angle, and then this is the height that you want for that set. And then on a given hive box, here's one before and then one after. So you just wrap it all the way around, and here's the top piece, and the hive is well insulated. What I'm going to do for the winter, for this winter, is I'm going to use Reflectix and go around this bottom, because this is a scale, so you can't use anything rigid because you want this to float so you can monitor what's going on. So I'm going to just use Reflectix, and I'm going to put a skirt around it so that it will continue to float and still get scale, but at the same time I don't have wind coming in underneath the hives through this. So this will create a good seal underneath it. For the research project for the University of Montana is the class that I was taking that took the master's class. One of the requirements is to complete a 5-page research paper, either on critiques of existing papers or a project of your own. I chose the project of my own, and the goal was to then evaluate the summer heat factor with regard to hives. And so out of the 12 hives, I made 10 of them kind of in the project, and kept 2 of them out in case I had, problem I needed to back up. And so then I had 5 hives that were insulated and 5 hives that were not insulated to figure out, what that effect might be. So 10 of the 12 hives in. Per hive, 2 broodminder sensors above and below the brood. 1 broodminder under the hive scale. That gives you also the weight of the hive as well as the temperature, outside temperature. 5 of the 10 would be insulated. And then is there a notable difference? So this was the hive all up, everything, all the various hives that were in play. I've got a simplified image of this so you can see that here are the 5 insulated hives, and then we have 5 uninsulated hives. Here's that extra stand I was talking with you, one of them. And so the ones that are interested in the research project, as it turned out, were these smaller hives. So I just want to draw them to your attention. Lookout Mountain, Silver Queen, Little Tahoma were the uninsulated ones. Steamboat Prow was insulated. And so I had 8 weeks to complete it. It was more than I should have taken on, frankly. It was just really a lot of work. I ordered additional broodminder equipment. I got material for and built the additional beehive stands. That took a weekend of itself. Built the insulation top covers and the wraps. The broodminder equipment arrived, but when it arrived, 1 of the 4 broodminder sensors worked. The other 3 did not. As it turns out, they hadn't even been flashed by broodminder yet, so they were just, DOA. And then 0 of the 4 broodminder under the hive scales worked because they would not register. Device belonging to another account. So I called broodminder, I emailed broodminder, asked for express shipping of replacements. They said, no, we'll fix the issue with the scales with duplicate IDs in Iowa. Make a long story short, it wasn't resolved until after the research project itself was done. So I was I got a hold of Rich, and he told me that I could do a manual download and get about 2 weeks of the data and then load it into Excel. So I had to do a big workaround to be able to get the data into a manageable state that was coming off the broodminders. The one thing I will say about the broodminder team is they acknowledged the issue and they did respond to my requests. Not necessarily the way that I could, but they were busy with the EAS show on the East Coast, and they're a small company. So they did help with a workaround, but yeah, that made it hard for me. But the results, this is interesting, and I hope you're able to see these results. This was unexpected, and I liked that part about it because I thought, okay, well, we'll see what happens. So ignore this, please ignore this up and down one. This is when I'm working in the apiary and I set the sensors, I removed the sensors and set them down. And so I wanted to have the honesty of having all the data in the set, but this is the reason for that. So what we want to do is I saw that it's like, wait a minute, why are these oscillating? What is going on here? It's like I have stable temperatures in these other hives and these other ones are oscillating. So I extracted out most of the stable hives, and I noticed that it was the smaller hives. Remember these small hives, Tahoma, Silver Queen, and Lookout Mountain? These were the hives that were having these significant temperature oscillations, going up to 100 and down to, 75, while the other hives were staying very, very, very stable. Most importantly, who wasn't here was Steamboat Prow. So the difference was that for the hives that were insulated, or the larger hives, so even the larger ones that were not insulated, were thermally stable. They didn't have this oscillation. And so one of the reasons that I was basically, attributed that for is that the larger hives had large honey stores, and they had a thermal mass, so an inertial mass of thermal energy that allowed the hives to maintain their temperature. But these smaller hives, especially these newer hives, these were hives that had just been split. I was working on building them up. These are first-year hives. They didn't have enough stores, and they didn't have a lot of bees to be able to manage their temperatures. But what was interesting was Steamboat Prow, who happens to be in the light green here, did, and it was insulated. One more thing to share with you is that I'm very busy, and I'm sure all of you are busy. We don't have time to do everything, right? So I realized that, oh my gosh, these other hives need help because it was going to get hot again. It's like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And I didn't have time. So what did I do? I went and I placed a large piece of 2-inch rigid foam on top of the top cover, right? At least I can block the sun beating down on the aluminum tops, right? And so what I noticed is that here I was getting the oscillation. After I placed it on, it was much more controlled. So it may be, this is summer heat. This isn't winter cold, but in summer heat, this even provided a bit of relief and control for those hives. So it's one possibility of something to think about. What if we just, did top covers during the summer, particularly for your new hives or splits or what have you, to give them a little bit of a thermal advantage, so they're not having to spend their energy trying to heat or cool the hive, and particularly the brood. So looking ahead, I'm going to continue winter prep. I'm going to monitor the overwinter honey stores. Eli made a really good point, and this is something that I'm concerned about, is that when the bees are going through cold spells, they're going to cluster and they're going to keep warm, and so they're going to minimize their energy that they spend, and they're going to focus on keeping the cluster warm. And so it's possible that if the hives are insulated, that the bees may be more active. And so I'm going to go into winter with more honey stores than normal, just in case. So I'm going to monitor how much honey stores they're using over the winter and report out when I'm done. But to see if the hives are warmer, are they actually going to consume more resources because they're moving around more? Also going to use low protein patties for winter bees. Something I wasn't aware of that I learned was that high protein patties for winter bees creates a problem for Nosema because the digestive tracts, they need to be able to do cleansing flights. And if you give them too much protein over the winter, there's a possibility where you're kind of backing up their systems. I'm going to insulate the rest of the hives and paint them, paint the insulation to protect the insulation. And I'm going to put coroplast shells, these little, the corrugated plastic, and put them over the hives to be able to give them kind of water resistance. And that's how I plan to go into this winter. And so I'll take pictures and report that out. I'll continue to monitor the brood binders. And then if I get bored, I may investigate Smart Shield, which somebody brought up to my attention. It's 20 millimeter insulation with an R23 value, but it's also pricey. But it may be something that I'd be just interested to see what one does by comparison with the other hives. So that's what I'm doing looking ahead. And for those just looking at insulated hives, just to give you some ideas, the Apame hives, I think we have some beekeepers here that have Apame that could probably report out on their success with that. These are the Lyson hives. These are polystyrene and insulated. They're less expensive. And I think Better Bee carries these right now. These are from Germany, I think. And then there's the new one on the block is Hive IQ, which are doing insulated hives, and they are a little bit more of a system and a mechanism of hives. And they're new on the block. And I don't know if anybody has them in the area, but they are an option. And when I talked with Broodminder about my findings and stuff, Rich came back saying, he wasn't surprised to see the thermal oscillation that was occurring. And he said, Hive IQ may ultimately be a really good solution. And it's like, okay. And then just to follow up on our bee barn friend, Jim at Vino Farms, this is his bee barn. This is bee barn 1.0 behind him and bee barn 2.0 behind him. He has combined, he's got that same stand, except that's the lighter version of the stand, by the way. And he has then put a deep and a medium frame together. And he puts that in an insulated hive, and that creates the insulated hive for him. And then he's got, then he puts his supers and stuff on top. But so those are some different strategies if you're considering insulating your hives. That's it.
Well, thank you, Ty. That's a lot. Okay. And it raised a lot of questions. So going through the chat, did the question, let's see, the size of the opening that you're going to use in the end, did that get answered along the way? The front opening, right? Because there's only one opening.
Yeah, the front opening. So it's just it's the normal opening, and right now I have them on an entrance reducer because of robbing. So right now they're on an 1.5 inch opening.
Okay, and then the hives on top of the brood minder with that's a pivot, that what's it called, that angle iron?
Oh yeah, the angle iron, the speed metals. Yeah. Question about that?
Yeah, this it looks at one point, it looks like the hives are not flush with the insulated stands when you have that brood minder and the metal. But then you said you were going to do a reflective skirt around it.
That's right. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Is that I'm going to do a skirt around the hive all the way around, because I don't want to. If it was solid, it would then impact the scale, because now it's carrying weight. And so I'm going to do a reflective skirt around the outside of the insulation, and basically to block the wind and create a stable area.
And it has to be able to move. That scale has to pivot on that angle iron.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And then removing the insulation, Velcro. You had I saw little black Velcro coming around. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And using that 3M78, that this is what used for for getting it to secure the Velcro to the paint to the insulation.
Yeah. Did anybody ever do the data on hives and trees? I don't think anyone's done it. It's just it's just calculating backwards the R factor. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be another master's program. That would be another good project.
First, you got to find bees in trees,
right.
or illegally keep them in gum trees, in the logs, the tree gums. Yeah, it would be possible to do with a research permit, of course.
Sure.
Okay. The pollen patty issue. In Western Washington, we get away with a lot of pollen patties that we wouldn't do elsewhere. So, pollen patties are advised against in a lot of the South. First of all, you get small hive beetle. So you put it in only when the bees absolutely need it. Then up here in Western Washington, I know that I advise for the pollen patties when the bees can't forage and they have brood they need to raise. And okay, Ty, you're thinking on it.
Yeah, no, the idea was to have low protein patties, and there's a thing called the Krabby Patty, and there's a Krabby Patty recipe that you can place in on top of the hive frames, and that's been used to be able to provide low protein food for the bees over the winter. There's also AP23 is one of the Dant's things, and one of the consultants in the master's program was actually a bee nutritionist, and he participated in the creation of the AP23 formula and provided a lot of detailed information about that. So it's basically to avoid nosema, but again, your mileage may vary.
Yeah, that's a problem. And if you get cleansing flights, if we have enough sunny days, not a big issue. But yes, maybe on one of our really super rainy, I think of it 2 winters ago, there were months that my bees did not see the sun. It just simply, the sky never cleared during the day for months. And that was the spring that I saw some fecal spotting on the outside, which I had not. That's not at all normal for my hives. Mouse guard. With the hives that far off the ground, there's a question. Do you need mouse guards? Could it be a problem that high off the ground?
We have 7 cats.
Okay, that's mine too. I have cats. When you come out, ask if you see something funny like that, and people will say, yeah, I just feed the neighborhood cats.
Yeah, and the cats has visibly been keeping track of the mice and rats. So the hives themselves are sitting inside a 6-foot fence area, so we don't have to worry about bears in that regard, because there's dogs and stuff in the area as well. So the things that I worry about are ants, and so I've also shaved the bottom feet of the hives. So if I want to place them in a bowl or something like that as to create a moat situation, I've had that. But this year, the ants actually haven't been bad, so I haven't had to do anything extraordinary.
And so all of this insulation research and information we get comes from the temperate zones, right? Like there's a last comment is that Lyson hives are from Poland. All of this design is from the UK, which is our latitude, or the rest of Europe, temperate zone. And I if you take my classes, I'm always preaching location, location, location. Yeah, I see smiles. People are laughing at me, but I do. And this is something, it's like we can use pollen patties year round, and we don't have small hive beetle yet. Cross your fingers, okay? But supposedly it can't pupate in wet, cold ground. And that's the reason I've heard, is that we have been saved from small hive beetle. It comes in, we'll change that pollen patties whenever you feel like it attitude.
Yeah. One thing I should mention, by the way, is what I'm finding is also the bees love to collect between the exterior of the hive and the rigid foam, and they just park out there. They love it. When I open and stuff, I don't really bother them. It's not so tight against the hives that that type of thing happens. So there's just oftentimes in the back of the hive, there's just bees just camped out there, and they're not trapped. They can easily move in and out, but that's where they like it, and it's like, oh, that's interesting.
And then do rats get into the hives? Whoever just came in? Nope, not with that many cats around. So, and I can tell you, if your hives are really low to the ground, the rats will love the dry area to dig under, but putting them that high off the ground, that and 7 cats would help. But yeah, if they're low to the ground, and there's so many reasons we don't do it in this area. We just don't put the hives down on the ground or even that close. We tell you about skunks, but the rats, they will tunnel right under, and they love to live under there. And I wouldn't trust them for a second not to come up and chew their way in. I bet they could do it easily in an evening.
And the stands are 18 inches high, which makes it really convenient for me in picking up and moving around boxes and stuff like that. I'm not bending down too far to go grab them, time and again. And the other thing is they're at the right height to sit on them too.
Take a break.
So when I take a break, that empty stand that I have there, I just sit on that, take a break, and get some water.
Okay, so mouse guards, using that with the insulation, the bees take care of the airflow if you give them one entrance, right? If you did restrict it, they would do something. If you left it too open, they might propolis it closed. So right. Mouse guards would probably work because they have the mouse guards I've seen have a lot of holes in them. Yeah,
and to some extent, there's a version of the Better Bee thing that actually has kind of a mouse guard built into it. And when I'm using that, they don't bother it at all. It's fine.
Small hive beetles have been seen a little bit, but the thing is, they don't overwinter, is what everyone's saying. Cross your fingers. They've been spotted up in way up in Skagit County or something. And sometimes you think you've seen small hive beetles, and no, Nathan would know. Nathan would know if they're small hive beetles, they're small hive beetles. But a lot of people see the grain beetles, and they're a lot skinnier. But yeah, Nathan would know.
And if somebody wants to come see the apiary or something like that, I live on Lord Hill, and happy to share whatever designs I've built or whatever information I have, and you can maybe make a judgment call on your own of what you like and don't like. And
then you were also saying that you could make available the written out part about Dan Harvey and because that's really interesting. I really got fascinated when I went to Dan Harvey's a couple of years ago. I don't remember how many years I went there.
Yeah, Dan's really a character, but he's done his homework, and that was really useful information that he provided. But I think you've got a slightly earlier version of the deck, and I can give you another PDF, and you can post it or whatever. I'm happy if people wish to use that. I'll share it right now just so you can see it.
And the Harveys get so many questions because what they've been doing has been very advanced, and they were really working on treatment only with essential oils, working for treatment resistance. They were working with Harble, John Harble, I think, of the ARS of the USDA Baton Rouge lab down in Louisiana. They were working with them because they brought the Russians in first. So they have a fair amount of Russian blood in what they've been breeding. And he's really good at record keeping, and he can talk all kinds of research that he's been doing. So
they're very nice to work with. Judy's really pleasant to talk with, and then Dan's got all the details. He's amazing.
Actually, I had kept bees for years, and he was the first time anybody had ever let me see their apiary. I'd kept bees for 4 or 5 years. I'd never seen anyone else's beehives, which is why I think that the beehive open houses we have at the club apiary are really good, really important to come to. You learn a lot. And why does his work? He's got a system worked out. And he'll tell you about some of the other things that he tried, like housing bees inside of a shed with the entrances going out. He's done a number of things. Okay. Okay. Is that Michael? Or Michelle? Oh dear. This is all done without a quilt top. But you have a quilt top when you put 2 inches of foam on the top.
Yeah, but it's not, there's no newspaper or anything like that. It is 2 inches of foam inside and then 2 inches of foam on the top cover. And no moisture absorbency because there is no condensation. Right.
That's the weird thing, is the way we do it with thin-walled, thin-roofed hives. We create warm air, warm air rising. And if we don't put something there between the cluster and that cold, when the warm, moist air hits that cold top, condensation. So this is where it gets, you got to do the whole thing. Blended beekeeping gets people in trouble. They do one thing, like they get rid of the upper entrance, but they didn't get rid of the condensation. They didn't insulate the top. Or they insulate the top and the sides equally, and maybe that creates a spot at the top. Maybe you want twice as much insulation roughly at the top than the sides. So this is, I know this is advanced beekeeping, but it's really good. I think even people who are in their first year are wondering why they're being told things. And this is wonderful. All the visuals and the explanation. Bees set up their own ventilation, and we don't always give them credit for that, but they've been doing it for millions of years.
And it's fun with the broodminder. At least you can monitor what's going on, you know, so there's some things that we can all learn from as you know, that happens. So it's been really good.
So does this really make sense? Because we're happy to talk longer about it.
Because I can attach the Mitchell paper.
Yeah.
I think that would be interesting.
I think I had a little trouble getting exactly the Mitchell paper that Dan Harvey gave me years ago when I went there. That exact one. He writes a lot on thermodynamics and stuff, and if you really like math, he really gets into the math.
Do I have humidity readings with the broodminders? Yes, I do. I didn't publish them simply because I focused on temperature, and I was focused on getting it done. So I keep it simple, stupid type thing. But I do have the track record, and happy to share with them that the humidity levels are in good zones for them. But
the other thing on humidity is a lot of people don't realize that if there is brood in the hive, the area the brood is in has to be 50 to 80% humidity. And why? Because if you have open brood and it's bathed in liquid, you can't have that jelly it's in evaporating off too fast, right? Logically. So at least that area. So it's not high humidity that causes trouble in hives. I know this violates what you hear on the internet, but they don't live in Western Washington where we're going to have high humidity no matter what we do. But the bees want 50 to 80%. Think about that. And if you're sucking it off with an upper vent constantly, and especially if you're doing a cross vent, which is actually recommended in a lot of beekeeping places, that you put the front entrance on one side, you put the upper entrance on the other side, you would have a crosswind going through, and it would actually be going through the brood area. So all of this is decisions. But humidity is not the problem. It's condensation and drip in the wrong place.
And so here's humidity, for example.
Yeah. And humidity is
anywhere between, depending on which hive. Some are insulated, again, some are insulated, some are not.
Okay. So at the top, you might explain that the very top lines are the actual temperatures inside the hives.
That's correct.
Right above the brood, that sensor. Yep. And then you have the daily fluctuation outside. Yep. And then below that next set says humidity in small letters. Okay.
Yep.
I'm not fast at reading graphs. You gotta let me catch up. But the humidity. And then it puts the outside. See outside the broken line?
The outside's a broken line. Yeah, that's the actual weather. Yeah.
Yeah. So bees are controlling that all the time anyway, and they have to.
And so Little Tahoma is on my watch list right now, because I'm going to go insulate Little Tahoma all the way around, but I don't have time until this weekend. So that's the status of Little Tahoma.
it makes sense to me that the smallest hive would suffer the most from heat temperature fluctuations outside.
And
That
I had no idea, you know, that was the thing that really caught me, was like, I had no idea that could be a problem.
I know for people who came to the queen raising workshop, and I was busy putting pieces of styrofoam on top of all the nukes and such and trying to keep them on there with bricks, because nukes don't come naturally with anything that you could insulate the top with. And especially when you're trying to make queens in May, the temperature fluctuations this May were still pretty intense. And actually, even in the middle of summer, it's natural for the daytime high and the nighttime low to be what, 30 degrees apart easily?
Yeah.
So why should the bees have that stress? We wouldn't accept that. I'm turning the heat up at night. Drops 30 degrees. Oh, and the brood. Don't forget brood temperatures. That's part of that brood zone. I hope everybody that's more on the beginner level caught that. 92 to 94 in that range. The bees and the sensor will registers like 80 to 95 or something as a brood zone, but that's because it's where the sensor is. And sometimes you can tell that your whole brood cluster has moved with broodminder because the temperature drops and you know the bees are fine. But you can also tell if it's moving up from one sensor to the other. And that's part of why you have two sensors, right?
Right, because the lower sensors, they may be below them at this time, and they may be up. And so that's part of the inspection thing, is also making notes. So when I go through on the hive inspection sheets, I make the notation of where the broodminder sensors are, which box they are on top of, and then where the brood is. And you know, in some cases, I have to move the sensors because below the brood is actually in a different location now.
This was a lot to absorb, and I know it conflicts with a lot of what, even in the WASBA manual, I was actually told by the vice president of education that I will teach that there will be an upper vent. That's the end of it. So okay, I teach it, and then I tell you, well, I've always done it, and I've always had the opportunity for it. What I do now is I duct tape over that little notch in the inner cover that I always used for a small upper vent, because that's what I was told. And I duct tape over it until I see the inner cover get wet, and then I usually panic a little bit and open it up. But I don't really think it's necessary. Now that I've got the moisture shims above the inner cover, I've evolved a lot in 9 years, I can tell you. You know, because I started out with, varroa treatments aren't really that important, and nobody needs to really feed extra dry feed or anything in the winter, and nobody needs to insulate, and screen bottom boards aren't necessary. And okay, I've evolved a lot in 9 years. I still keep that option though, I gotta admit. I tape over that hole and have it there. And when you see the extra moisture, if you see a jump inside your hive, you're opening the top and you see moisture down there, it will be late January, February with my amount of insulation, which is not as complete as Ty's, where he probably won't see it. That'll be interesting. You have to tell me, Ty. And when you see it in late January, early February, you'll also see on the brood, you'll see that the brood nest is they're building it up again, because the inner sensors will jump again into the brood zone. They'll disappear. It'll come down when they actually do have a brood break. Okay, how many people believe there's a brood break at all? And then on the people who believe there is one, is it kind of like maybe late November to mid-January? Yeah. How much? Yeah. A little. We don't have that big brood break. Yeah. So, okay.
So I will be stationing, I will be putting up swarm things with the beginning, with the spring of next year. That's one thing I'll change, because even though I was splitting and stuff like they built up so fast. They were just exploding out of there. So even if I was trying to stay ahead of splits, I'm still going to have swarm captures, and I have to compliment my wife for assisting very quickly when when she's like, "Uh-oh, they're swarming." And it's like, "Oh no."
Have you tried sort of under supering? Okay, they're starting to fill one box. And if it doesn't have a lot of brood in it, if they're actually putting stores in that upper box, you got like 3 Westerns on. Okay, when you put the next one on, sometimes when you don't have a lot of time, you lift the one with a lot of honey, or even I have even been known to take some of the brood in that 3rd box and move it down and make sure that it's only honey that I'm putting up above stores, and then slide the new super in between, or checkerboard it at that point, or entice them, rather than put the empty box on top, which it seems that's what you see, because commercial beekeepers are in a hurry and they just slap boxes on top. But sometimes that under supering will help a little.
Get them distributed.
And then it's a matter, can you get into your hives to have time to equalize, to have time to anticipate, and life happens. So you end up with swarms.
Yeah.
Okay, answer on the R value of the boards you used.
The
boards, right? It's
3/4 inch pine, and so its R value is it's softwood, and hang on, I had the number here.
Oh yeah, you had.
So Ty, the reason I'm asking, and I was thinking of the pink boards, the insulation boards. So Man Lake makes the Easy On hive covers that are an R value of 5, and you don't have to DIY all of it. And yeah, they're $43, but also by the time you hassle around with it.
Yeah.
Did you just like want a project, or is there a reason that you?
Part of it is because I also have hives of different heights. You know, I have deeps and mediums and stuff like that. So how do you make it tall enough because it's really identified for, like, 2 deeps or maybe 3 mediums. And so this way, if I'm making them, I can adjust them. So I'll actually have them of different heights because part of this is because I'm going to go into winter heavy on honey to understand whether they're going to consume a lot of stores if they're insulated or not. I really want to see them get through the winter, and so I'm going to carry more insulation on it because they'll be taller.
Okay, there's a question about what if you put the quilt top in addition to all this, just for risk management, just insurance. And what I tell beginning beekeepers is do everything that you want to do that's not going to hurt the bees. Go ahead and tilt for if you're worried about condensation, but in this case, it shouldn't happen at all. If you did all of this double insulation on top, side insulation, or even no insulation on the side, just more insulation on top than you have on the sides.
What I found it just happened that I had ants in two of the hives that love that wet paper, and so I dumped the paper out, and so 2 hives went through just with the 2 inches of rigid foam, and the other 2 hives went through with the paper on it. When I opened them up in the spring, the ones with paper on it were wet. The ones just with rigid foam weren't. They were dry, and the top board was dry. The inner cover, the underside of the inner cover was fine. So it was kind of like, wait a minute, it was not what I expected. So I'm going to go through. There's no quilt. There's no absorbency above. I'm just going 2 layers of insulation.
It would be easy to put it in if you can't sleep nights. The Wall Street test. Don't risk more than you can handle the stress of losing. So if you can't sleep nights, you could do it, but expect, like Ty said, it could be the sponge that's going to soak everything up. And if you want to tilt your hives by raising them 1 inch in the back, you could do it, although there should be no condensation on the inner cover or on if you have solid bottom boards. Solid bottom boards, I suppose it could be. That's where the opening is. So maybe the 1 inch tilt might not hurt there.
Something can't hurt,
Yeah. See, and a lot of times people say, well, should I do this, this, and this? And I know I just told one beginning beekeeper, it all sounds like it won't hurt. Go ahead and do it. It's like putting a pollen patty on when you don't need it, unless you see small hive beetle, which people are just starting to notice. And I'm sure it's coming in on the nukes and packages we're all getting. That's what's happening. But so far has not overwintered in the soil, we hope. So if you want to add this and that, until there's a reason not to do those little things, and they're cheap, I'd go ahead. Okay, winterization, the stacking order. Okay, if we're finished with the Insulating Hives, the more general wintering questions are the stacking order. Oh, except kind of comparing to the Man Lake easy on hive cover wrap things. Those drive me nuts if they're ones that you wiggle them over. One of the things about ties is with the Velcro, you can get to it anytime. You want to do oxalic acid, you want to check for swarm control because you had an early warm up in February and you're a little worried. That Velcro, you can get it off. On a lot of the wraps, you can't get them off without cutting them open. You put them on, you leave them on. So if you want to unstack quickly and look at something, you can't. There's that really warm day. I'm not recommending as a general thing in the wintertime that you open up your hives, but that really wonderful day happens and you want to see what's going on inside. And you think you can get in and the bees will have a couple of hours to resettle down before the end of the day, before the temperatures drop from the 70, 75 it was down. So if anyone has used the Man Lake, let Toby know. I wonder if that's the black horrible thing that I had to cut open to get in.
They show two things. One says it has a Velcro strap to tighten.
Okay.
So I think there's the option of the horrible and maybe improved on, but I might get one just to see what the heck it's all about.
We all experiment. Ty just took it to a higher level. I like that. but we all experiment, right? I just have to try fondant this year, the gooey fondant that the bees could access a little more easily. And I'm thinking of the cold extended spring when they can't even take liquid syrup and you're worried about them. That just would be such cheap insurance. If I can remember how to make candy taffy, get that soft crack or whatever it is. I've got the candy thermometer to do that kind of fondant. Okay, I'm sorry, Laura. Condensation on the top board. No openings at the top of my deep.
Yeah, so you were sorry. You're talking about condensation. This is my first year, so I haven't gone over a winter yet. So are you saying, and I'm looking on Amazon and they have this wrap you can put around it. So you're saying that, you know, the bees are going to make this warmth and there might be water condensation on the top, like the top
Right.
cover. I
Yeah.
don't have any holes.
Yeah, we won't.
So if there's condensation up there, that's the bad thing. So you're saying to tilt it a little bit, tilt the hive, if that happens?
Okay, we won't hit winterization
So-
at the very end of beginner. So I know it's like the last chapter and we go over it really fast. But when the
okay.
bees consume their carbs, they do the same thing we do. Carbohydrates in, they breathe out carbon dioxide, CO2, and water, H2O. Where's the water supposed to go? Well, it goes into the air. You got the water vapor. And when they start to brood up is when it really hits that late January, February thing. And that's when people in the past have had troubles. If you don't insulate the top, that warm moist air is going to go up and it's going to hit there. And it's just like having a glass of water, cold water in the room. The condensation doesn't happen all over the room. The condensation happens where there's a cold surface and the warm air, the water in your room air hits that cold surface. On a glass, it just means it's wet when you go to pick that up. But if the cold surface is up above the bees and they form a cluster, and the cluster is not something that they can just move. The cluster is something that only bees do. They are the only insect that really does this kind of cluster. And they form a circle around the queen, who must be kept at about 68 to 70 degrees. Okay, it's 3D. We're starting to talk in beginners about 3D. They do everything in 3D the most efficient way they possibly could. So they're keeping that queen in there. When they put brood in there, that's when things step up. Metabolism has to go up because brood has to be kept at 92 to 94 degrees. Our body temperature is 98.6. To generate that heat, taking in carbs, breathing out CO2 and carbon dioxide and water vapor. And that's when people start to see the moisture on their inner covers and they start worrying. And if you had no insulation at the top, one way that's been handled by commercial beekeepers, for example, is instead of worrying about insulating the top, they take the back of the hive and slide like a 1x2 under it and raise it up an inch. And then when you raise the back of the hive up, if you have a solid bottom board and if you have an inner cover, the water should run this way down toward the front entrance of the hive and out. It's okay, and it also is a problem if you pool water on a wooden bottom board because the bees have to crawl through it. That isn't important at the beginning of the winter, but by the end of the winter, you have some guck and garbage and mold. And when you clean it out, you'll see if you have solid bottom boards. If that's where, and you don't mind that condensation is collecting there, except for it's all moldy and there's probably some dead bees that didn't get taken out. So if the bees don't have to walk through a pool of gluck, and American hives are designed that way, that the bees land on a surface, walk in, and then go up. There's actually other hive designs. You'll hear so much when you start beekeeping, you hear so many reasons why something is done this way or that way. It is mind-boggling. It really is. So the cluster cannot move. Once the cluster's around the brood and the brood is in the cells, they can't move. Plus, if you look, last year, the August monthly meeting there's a lot on preparing for winter. Didn't do that this year, but I did it last year and the year before. So there are monthly meetings where I present on this, and I never know how boring it is to go over things that you will cover in beginner and apprentice, but sometimes it's okay with people. But you can go back to those monthly meetings, and they're on our YouTube channel, so they're public view, and go through them and kind of look at the diagrams, and you'll see this condensation diagram with ventilation, and then you'll see the hive stacking. Somebody asked about the hive stacking order. Okay. Depends partly on what you're putting on, and that's in there. And so I have to know what people are planning to put on. But you'd have your bottom board, and you'd have your hive bodies brood to the bottom, if you can, stores to the top, okay, and then extra honey if you're worried, you want that insurance. Honey is very insulating too. Then you have either your inner cover, Vivaldi board, candy board, people call it, but you've got like a solid something. It's either the inner cover or something that replaces the inner cover. And that is something that apparently commercial beekeepers never worry about, but hobbyist small scale beekeepers tend to do it. I don't know at what point it becomes too much trouble to do an inner cover and an outer cover, but commercial does it differently. So hobbyists, okay, so that's that solid place where if that was cold, you could have water hitting there, getting cooled, and dripping down on the cluster that cannot move out of the way. They can't move out of the way because they can't desert the brood. Even if there's only a queen in there, the cluster, they're hanging together and they're tightly packed, conserving heat and doing the thoracic muscle shiver. So they're packed in. You've also got the combs that they are doing this cluster inside of. They're still on honeycomb. So they can't move. And that's why the dripping is so dangerous. And it can happen on the eastern side of the mountains where it really drops in temperature. If you don't have any kind of insulation, you don't have a moisture shim, they talk, it might be mentioned in one of the manuals about the moisture will rise up, hit a cold rift, freeze, doesn't come down. Okay, keeps doing this, keep doing this, keep doing this. Hit the first hot sunny day, all that water comes down. So hobbyists never get into this, but it could happen with commercial beekeepers, depending on what they do. That's a lot of explanation. So stacking order, I got you up to the inner cover. Then you decide you could put some freed right under the inner cover, I find the bees won't use a pollen patty unless it's under the inner cover until through the worst of the winter. They just simply will not even go above the inner cover until it gets a certain temperature and the hive is waking up. So some people put the pollen patty there, and some also put a piece of newspaper. I'll show this when we get to feeding, and then winterization in beginner. Newspaper with some granulated sugar on it. Dry sugar is not a replacement for honey, though. You want as much honey. We'll talk about that. 60 pounds is considered pretty conservative enough. You should be able to get your bees through a fairly long winter, where it's not that it's so cold, it's that they can't fly out to forage, and there's no real nectar source anyway, until I think the maple, unless anybody can think of something before April, big leaf maple. There's lots of pollen if the weather is good, if they can fly out. So now it's getting complicated. Okay, now, but if you suppose you're still worried about drips, I mean, maybe you've even done everything Ty recommended, and like they said, well, can I hedge my bets? Yeah, if you want to put a moisture shim, you'd put it above the inner cover. If you were putting extra feed that they're going to get too early in the spring, if people put sugar blocks, the fondant I was talking about, they put it right above the inner cover. And if you're replacing the inner cover with a Vivaldi board or whatever you call it, it's a ceiling that holds heat, but has some kind of hole, usually so that air can keep going up. And then you got the moisture shim. Okay, if anything did drip, it would hit that moisture shim. The burlap, shredded paper, Depends diapers, whatever you put in there. So, and then if they have solid insulation, like Ty's talk, I do both. I do solid insulation, the piece of that styrofoam, and the moisture shim, super secure, a little of everything. And then your outer cover, which telescopes down. And again, commercial beekeepers don't have it telescoping down that stops wind from coming through and keeps the rain from sort of wicking in. That's a lot of explanation, but there's so many decisions.
And Anthony, are you using Apame? I thought.
Oh, Tony, yeah,
Tony, yeah.
Tony.
Yeah, I have 5.
Yeah, what's been your experience?
Well, I don't have any moisture problems, and I had feeding problems last winter. I lost about 3 hives. They starved to death. They ate everything. They wouldn't go up the shafts in the top feeders. So about a month ago, I drilled 3/8-inch holes through the top feeder, the bottom part of it. It's got lids that go on it. And I mixed some honey with Ultra Bee, and I checked after a day, and God, the bees are just coming up through there like crazy. So the question is, are they going to do that during the winter? And but I don't have any moisture problems whatsoever. I've never had them with my Langstroth either. No water. But I had, a hardware cloth board with and I had shavings, and I had vents on the side, but I've never had any dampness in it at all, ever.
So Apame's got quite a design. Yeah, Tony,
Yeah.
I still think you ought to do a presentation just on Apame hives and the whole way they've got. But once you kind of get into it, then the feeders fit a certain way, and you put 7 frames in an 8-frame size, and like 9 and a 10. It changes a little bit, right?
Well, yeah, it
Bottom
depends.
boards change, feeders
Well,
change.
they had some problems with it. It was called the Queen Defender, where you can break it up into 4 nukes, or 2 nukes, or 3, or 1 hive, and they had these little mini frames that bridge together. And when I first put those in to do that, to create some nukes, those things wobbled and they fell apart. And then you can imagine what kind of mess you'll have on that. So I called them up, and they stopped selling them. They say they're sold out, but they went back to their the manufacturer that's making the ABS frames. So that was a big problem. And Well, there's all kinds of things I can tell you, all the advantages and disadvantages. Like the bottom board, when you buy them, they're screwed into the bottom brood box. And so when I tried to clean out the dead bees in the winter, you have to you take these 4 screws off for the mouse guards, but you can't, because they're kind of beveled inside the screen board. I couldn't clean the bees out. So what I did is I removed all the screws, and then I put latches like they have. I bought their latches, and I put latches on the bottom boards too, the bottom brood box. So now all I have to do is just unlatch them. I can move them. I can clean them out in less than 30 seconds and then put them back on and latch them together again. And there's a whole bunch of other things that, oh, the insulation, by the way, is 6.93 R factor. So, that's another thing with insulation.
Yeah. I think that'd be a great presentation, Eli. Lessons learned along the way with FMA, because you get all the hints, right?
Yeah.
All the best practices.
Okay. If we're kind of running out of insulation questions, we now have 2 about, okay, consolidating frames for winter. I think that means getting rid of all empty space. And then when do you start winterizing? Already. You're moving brood to the bottom, stores to top. You're trying to take empty frames out. You've already done your varroa treatments, or at least started them, hopefully. So on the consolidating frames, is that the issue? Is the brood to the bottom, the stores to top, get rid of any?
Here's my question. So I have a strong colony, and I have a deep box that's all honey frames. And then the bottom, I had the, 1 frame of honey on each side, on the outsides. And then it was all brood in the middle, but then they had more brood. So this was probably coming on to a month ago, maybe 3 weeks ago that I did this. And so I left a middle box because there was some brood in there and some honey. And I'm thinking Saturday looks like the warmest day we're going to have for the rest of the year. And so I'm going to go. I feel like I need to take that 3rd box off. And I'm assuming that they will, that brood will have hatched and I won't have, 2 boxes of it. Is it too late? Is it too cold for me to be moving frames around on those 2 bottom boxes to get them down to 1? And if there's still more, do I just sacrifice a couple frames to get to 2 boxes? That's the question on consolidating.
Okay. Do you have more than 1 hive first?
Yes. I have 2 frames that are in deeps and 2 colonies in deeps and 1 colony in mediums.
And you're going to have kind of an issue with that medium that's in the center of the strong hive.
They're off onto the side, and they're nasty, nasty little beasties. And if they don't make it through winter, c'est la vie. But anyway, we don't need to. But yes, I have multiple colonies.
Because remember, you can always equalize too. So
yeah, and I did some of that, and so that was still like the other one in deeps was all equalized and good, and then I still had these extras.
Because you can move brood frames easily, and you can shake the bees off if you don't want to try to move adult bees in. But even and you have, with all the robbing going on, the yellow jacket pressure and everything, I don't know if I would say leave the nurse bees on the way I would in the spring. You just
Right.
the nurse bees on and you move them over. But you can, if you have enough brood there, and it would fit into another hive better if you have a whole bottom deep of brood, then any other brood, if it would fit better into fill some space in the others, and then feed them the 2 to 1 so they fill in the holes.
Right. Okay.
Did that?
Yeah, and so it's not too late for me to do one last fiddling around.
I think we end up doing it because our bees don't really shut down the way they do in other places, unless tomorrow it freezes, snows 3 feet.
Right. Right.
But we have this gradual shutdown that is really horribly confusing. I think it is a lot of trouble. Last year, where they brought in pollen for 2 months, but they ate up their honey stores. I don't
Right.
know how many people got hit by that. I was
Yeah.
really worried because I don't know how to warn people. Yes, they're bringing in all that pollen, but they need carbs.
Yeah.
And then,
Okay, thanks.
okay, thanks. So does that help on when we start winterizing? The answer is kind of already. And I have that Ask a Beekeeper time, and I could go through winterizing kind of on an individual basis. What do you have? Where do we start? Can you get a deep's worth of bees and brood at the bottom, or a Western and a half? Or can you, and then do you have stores to put on top? Do you need to feed 2 to 1 like crazy so they store some funny honey, as we call it? Okay, so I don't know, it's Michael or Michelle. I'm sorry, don't know. Could you make it to that, or do you want me to try to do it now? If there's no other topic, I can try to do it now. Oh, Wade sent me a message about holding the robbing screens on. If you are not a do-it-yourselfer and you have your screws and stuff, a lot of the robbing screens are intended to be done with 2 screws to put them on and off. And those of us who are not very tech handy and who don't want to get out the screwdriver, even if it's a powered cordless screwdriver, every time we want to take the robbing screens off so that we can do oxalic acid through the front, if we're doing it through the front, we use little tiny mini bungee cords to hold them on each side. And there's these little like 4-inch bungee cords. So come out to the apiary and you'll often see weird stuff like that. That's why you should visit other people's hives. Everybody should just get together and find a bee buddy. And even if you just look at the outside of their hives and where they placed it, the kind of stand they used, how did they balance sun and wind, that sort of thing. Yeah. Oh, and Jen mentioned something I always say. I like when you have the bottom deep of brood, I like putting a deep of honey on each side for insulation. And that's before I started ever insulating the sides. But I think there's a good chance they're going to eat that while they're raising out that brood and then work their way up. That's my thinking. It seems to be working. So I often say that. And then sometimes you have that a few frames of brood, and you put it right above, figuring that they're going to move up anyway. Okay. And I can open up slides if anyone wants me to on winterization. I do have that PowerPoint presentation. It's just that for some people it's so elementary. And this was wonderful. This was a wonderful way to go into it, I hope. I hope we're not losing too many people along the way. Some are willing to say, okay, I'm going to keep it simple the first year. And then I will try this more other stuff. And if you have a mentor, I always say, if you have a mentor who wants to help you, over winter, Warray hive or something like that, or do the insulation and stuff. Yeah.
Or just do it on one hive, just to see what happens. Yeah,
if you only have 2 hives, can you sleep with it? Can you sleep with the risk? The Wall Street test. If you can't sleep with it, don't do it. you're gambling too much. Okay, so another winterization session. What I'm doing is Ask a Beekeeper, and I need to put that on just a second. I need to get that and put it into chat. I forgot that I can't do complicated stuff. I put it on the Facebook group. Let me see if I can get this into chat.
Are the slides going to be available for us to look at since I got in so late?
This is recorded. Matter of fact, we're still recording. So question and answer is getting, okay, how do I do it to everyone? Do I do it that way? No. Okay. Somehow it's going in as a reply. There's the Ask a Beekeeper. It's going in as a reply because I can't quite figure out how to do this. Okay. That is, I was talking about, there's another session on Tuesday nights. If you want to come 6:30 to 8 p.m. the next 3 Tuesdays, I figured the beginner class was too large. And also winterization. I'm not doing a separate talk on that this year. Thought about it, but this seemed like a good balance to bring in different ideas. So next Tuesday night, if that works, you can also try emailing. I'm often available by phone, especially as the weather turns bad. It starts raining nonstop. We can talk bees.
That's definitely true.
Okay. Oh, Krabby Patty. Who was it that came up with the Krabby Patty recipe?
Hill. Gentleman's name is Hill.
Oh, Dale Hill. Yeah,
Dale Hill. That's it.
Okay, so do they offer it at Dadant? Is that
No, it's just a recipe. I've got it. I can share it with you, Eli.
Yeah, I remember hearing about it. I don't know if it was Cayman Reynolds or who it was. Somebody was talking about it.
Yeah, Dale Hill.
Okay, and then AP23 is he worked hard to put it together. I can't believe that he uses that much animal protein in a bee food. But it works apparently. He tested it and everything and did the research. And he's impressive. He was the professor I was the most impressed by in the University of Montana Master Beekeeper program.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
Yeah, he actually talked to us and was available for questions. And
then the one that then the other professor that was on pesticides, that was also exceptionally good. Those are the two really, really good ones.
Who did you have on pesticides?
I'll pull up the name. I have to go look it up.
I'm trying to remember. I don't think I had.
He used to be a part of the Department of Agriculture. He was on the inspection side for pesticides, and had a very even-handed approach to considering pesticides, and I thought it was really informative.
Yeah, I don't think I heard him. It wouldn't be Eric Johansson or.
I'll have to look it up. It's not as handy as I'd like.
Yeah, the book that they use, it wasn't one of those authors.
No,
because one of those I think that guy's dead by now. Actually, it's an old book. Okay.
I forgot what I was looking up.
Okay.
Oh, by the way, did you want to mention Oops Paint?
Yeah, except I got one more question here on feeding the protein. Did we answer that, or is that an old question?
Oh, yeah. Krabby Patties, that's what I was looking up.
Oh yeah, look at that up. And then feeding protein during winter to prevent excessive brood formation. Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's a significant factor. I know that some people believe it's a significant factor, that if you feed the pollen patties, it will cause trouble. But I hear that coming a lot from the South. Now, in the South, their winter is 2 months maybe of low temps. So I don't know I think it's iffy. Since we have brood already, would we be pushing them to make more brood if we did pollen patties? The pollen sub is really not that good. How many people have had a pollen patty you put in and you thought, well, they might want this, and they crumble it all up like the little kid who doesn't want their crackers, and it all ends up on your slide out board, and they refuse it. And it's the same kind of pollen patty that another hive used. Yeah, it happens. So they don't really like the stuff. They use it because they have to, because it's raining outside, and that brood, they're starting that brood anyway. They passed the solstice, and I've seen the jump on the brood minders, and it'll be interesting because Ty's going to have it on a whole bunch of them, and you'll be able to see that drop down and that jump. And it was mid-January, the time that I first got a brood minder into a hive at the right time in the correct position, and the middle of January, but you've passed the solstice. And I don't know how much research has been done to be sure what it is that bees are doing. Is it the daylight length, even though they're inside of a dark hive and it's overcast outside, but they see UV. So they know daylight length, even when we don't think of the day as long. Even on a cloudy day, they know how much sunlight there is. Is it that? It isn't just temperature. We know it isn't just that. Is it food supply? That's what some people are saying. Okay, that it's the food supply. I just don't think it's a big factor, but then I don't feel like I've had an option in the last 2 cold, wet springs. Okay, other thoughts on that? Because I don't know that it's decisive. And it could. I've seen 2 hives side by side do something completely different. All my bees are mutts. Did you find the crab? There it is, Krabby Patty. Okay, great. I knew I'd heard of it. Okay, so Ty, did Dale Hill say it doesn't drive the brood up? Did he say that? And that's the reasoning behind Krabby Patties?
Yeah.
Okay, as long as you keep the protein low.
Yep. This is directly from him.
A reddish trail on your hive. I don't know. Any ideas? Jen has a question about it, and sometimes we just see stuff. You take a picture, you ask about it, and years later you find out the answer. Oh,
It looks awfully straight.
yeah. Doesn't it look like a swipe or something?
Or setting it onto something. When it was sat down, it was ever so
Oh,
slightly.
propolis. Is it a propolis stripe, maybe?
Well, it's the right color, but have you seen a propolis stripe that straight? Unless you set it on another frame that has propolis, right down the run.
A box. Maybe you turn the box over. Yeah, that's what Nathan says too. He thinks that setting a box on top of another box or on the inner
end,
inner cover, or because I always take the top telescoping lid off, set it over, and then I often do the box is kind of in order, and yeah. And Wade wanted to know what's better for bees than pollen patties. Real pollen. They prefer it overwhelmingly.
Oh, I think my question got lost.
I know. Where is it?
Ty, do you think that you did the roof only installation during the summer? So I was wondering if what you thought about it doing roof only during the winter, if it would be as effective as at regulating the temperature inside the hive during the winter as well.
I think this had the most effect because it was blocking the sun radiance on the aluminum covers. That's probably my first thing of what was the biggest effect of doing that. Certainly having it there would not hurt because it gives you that 4 inches. If you have an inside insulation and you have one on top, that allows you to avoid the condensation underneath because you have more insulation on top than you do the sides. And then the only thing is you probably would need to weight it down because it will fly off. So either a strap or a concrete block or whatever. But it will have an effect. It will. I mean, that is where the heat loss occurs, is going to be out of the top, but more than anything.
What if you put it inside the inner cover? Would that still be effective?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's just then now you've got 4 inches of insulation inside. It's however you wish to arrange it. Sure. But I will say the diamond blade is cat's meow for that stuff.
Do you have a recommendation to how to insulate the the lids if they're the peaked ones? I don't have the telescoping ones. I've got 2 little peaks.
All you need is a bevel cut. So you can either choose to go straight across it and just make it level at that point. But if you have them peaked and you want it to go along the peak, then you just make 2 bevel cuts on the edge of your on the foam.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, that'd work slick. That I would get the foam fusion stuff. That glue, it does tend to work better than others. It's
Okay.
worth it.
Thank you.
And people use that peaked roof too. If you do it a lot, the sides that way, instead of going this way, they use underneath for the moisture shim. That's where a lot of people put their wool blanket, wool comforter, burlap bag with burlap bags folded up or whatever. They often use that area for that. So you could do both.
Yeah. The one thing is, there any moisture that gathers up at that thing, it's just going to run down the side. So that's kind of a nice option too.
What was the name of the glue again? I started listening to Eli and it fell out of my head.
Foam fusion.
Thank you.
Yep.
I assume it's an Amazon type thing. You could find it there.
Yeah, Amazon or in the Seattle area, Blinken actually has it. I made a mad dash over there one day to get it. It holds pretty well.
And if this seems an awful lot of do-it-yourselfer stuff, yeah, there are the commercial alternatives. The wool comforter, I think that's one of the things people like about it is if you sew, but you don't have a shop to work in, that's actually people take a pillowcase or something more durable. If you have like a gabardine or duck cloth, people will take that and fill it up and if you use wool, it both absorbs moisture and super insulates. Historically, it has been what people have used an awful lot. And when you get into certain ways that they kept, somebody asked about, okay, what did they do way back? We skipped that question. Is that person even still here? Historically, what did they do to insulate hives? And Brother Adam worked a lot with in the United Kingdom, down the south part of England. He worked a lot with double walled, but I think in the end he gave it up. I think he didn't work out the condensation moisture problems. Wool comforters, the Valkyrie hive is a design for a long hive, a long length or the deep hive, and they do the wool comforter on top. You don't put the wool on the bee side. It has to be inside of something else because bees have all those little tarsal hooks and they're going to get caught in there and it's going to irritate them, and it's animal and it's going to be an irritation for them. So you use like duck or put the wool inside of like a pillowcase or something. And that's easy if it ever did get sogged, but I don't know if wool would ever sog. I think it would take a lot of moisture. And since the bees like the humidity, that's not really a problem as long as the condensation is not falling.
Yeah, and humidities apparently Varroa don't like high humidity either.
That humidity thing though is real. It's at the very top range of bees, so you'd have to push it a little higher than brood likes. So yeah, they talk about that, but I don't know if anybody's followed up. I know they had those findings, but I think it was a little tricky on how to use it successfully, because it's still kind of right there on the range, but I think it was right above that 80%. It starts to affect the Varroa. Interestingly enough, there are some researchers who have come out and said, we have a bigger Varroa problem up north, and they don't really know why. They're not giving a theory yet on it.
Oh, one follow-up, Eli. I received the higher bore, the larger bore, for the MK350.
Oh, okay.
So they
They
showed up. So
okay. I'm hoping my instructions show up. But the man I did get a hold of the beekeeper who makes the MK350. These are oxalic acid vaporizer gun type things. Instead of doing the wand, inserting it in, this is the one where it heats it in a cup, but the nozzle goes into one hole, into a narrow opening in the hive. So it's faster. You're not waiting for the wand to cool down each time and okay, you can just do it through a small hole, which you can drill in the back, or you can do the front. Somebody was explaining how they made a wood block that would block the front of the hive with the hole the size they need so that they could do it from the front. I think that would irritate the bees more though. If you sneak in from the back and you can shoot the oxalic acid vapor in from the back, you're not doing it where the guards are already. So you're not like hyper alerting the bees. And the hope is you don't have to fry as many, because there are always a few who give their lives for the hive on the end of your vaporizing wand. So the MK350 is one of those, comes in corded and battery. And then the BP Reaper is the other one that this beekeeper makes. It's honeybeecare.com. So they've had troubles with the bore though, because the nozzle keeps plugging up. The oxalic acid the vapor's coming out and it recrystallizes, I guess, before it gets all the way out.
It does. By the way, there's this little adapter in here, by the way, a little adapter ring.
Okay.
That comes in it. So Eli, you get one, just make sure that thing doesn't drop out, because there is tape and it's like, why is this tape? And then this thing drops out and it's like,
Okay.
That's the adapter so that it works on previous models. Something to
Okay.
know.
If I get that, I will. I'll have to send the one I've got in for repair. He said no. It sounded like he knew what part had gone out.
Okay.
So my MK350, and I was asking on the Facebook discussion group for the instructions. I never got instructions with the MK350. I think they were never enclosed. And then the BP Reaper, which is basically the same thing. It has this nice little digital display. It looks like I'm supposed to set something. And after the other one stopped working, I panicked. I said, I'm not starting up a $250 device if I don't know how to do it. I don't want to fry it. And he said he'd send me the instructions. I hope he remembers. As everyone knows, when the beekeeper makes something, and it came up earlier on something, it's a little hard sometimes to get a hold of them. They've got a great device, a great idea, and then you try to get a hold of them.
Yeah, Broodminder for one.
Yeah, that's the one. That's it. Broodminder is a little tricky. And to make it even trickier, they're international. I had Lorenzo over in Spain answer one of my questions, and it was really kind of a dumb question, except that it was not obvious to me how to navigate the site. I had to ask these little chevrons. If you click on them, you get a completely different menu. Anyway, it just never occurred to me. I just knew sometimes I could find the information, and the next time I went and I couldn't find that list. And I was not registering that it was a different drop-down list according to where you clicked. So they had to explain that to me, but it took a while to get an answer, but they do get back to you. It's just that it might take a while. And they had to change something once, that thing where the number has been assigned before.
Oh, yeah. They're unique IDs. That's what the whole thing with my scale. We've issued unique IDs. Well, why are there duplicates of the unique IDs? Oh,
Yeah.
that's okay. We'll fix it with the one in Iowa. It's like, come back tomorrow.
But it is a really neat system. I have not had the time to spend on it. I'm hoping this year I can really get it more set up, more organized. It is fun to watch the weight change. Paula on here is the person that you can go to on the discussion group. Paula every once in a while posts something of her broodminder, and she has the easy how to actually set it up video. If you're a little confused about where does this go and where does that go, they're trying to make it easier. But the people who did broodminder are engineers, and even when you're reading their how-to manual, once you find it and it's online, they think that it's very clear what they said. But it's not. That's my opinion. It's not as clear because they're engineering first.
Yeah.
And once you understand it, you go, oh, yeah, I get it.
Hey, Eli.
Yes, Steve?
You say that like I've been talking a lot.
No, it's just that here you are trying to buy a whole mess of honey for a low price.
No, I don't know what a low price is, gang. I don't have that kind of honey. So if anybody, it's the person that's doing it wants to infuse cider with honey. So I don't have 10 gallons. So if that's not high enough, 100, 110, then let me know. But if someone has got honey, I don't care. I don't have any honey to sell. So if someone wants to contact me, Michael Duncan contacted me, but I didn't get a response to Yell. So if somebody has got,
Mhm.
and this probably would be a continuous customer, that they decide to stay with, with their infused cider. So anyway, I've got my phone number on there. I only got one response. Let me know, and we'll leave it like it is.
Why don't they just go for cheap commercial honey?
I don't know. They wanted something local. They said they wanted to have it's local, local ciders. They wanted local beekeepers. They're in Snohomish here, so they wanted local honey, and they're willing to pay more for it. I think online is $80. They said, well, they can get it from Costco for $80 for a gallon, and I says we don't do it for $80 a gallon. So
I think you
go ahead,
could
sir.
maybe check with Dairyland,
Okay.
because Dairyland is related to the 400 hives that are sitting there near the silage bunker, and
Okay.
that's where they're at. So I think if you contacted Dairyland and tried to get a hold of Nick the beekeeper, Nick is the one that's overseeing those hives, and I would
Okay.
imagine they've pulled honey off of them, so he may be the person to contact. That would be the fastest path that I could think of.
Is Dairyland a local?
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah,
Is it?
it's a local thing, just southeast of Snohomish, like a mile.
It's called Dairyland, and it's Nick. Okay, I'll give it.
Dairyland. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, gang.
Yep.
So just a thought on the why. I've talked to one of our local distillers here, and in order to keep their Washington craft distillery license, everything has to be sourced within 100 miles. So if they're a local cidery and trying to be a craft cidery, that might be it.
You may be right then. They didn't tell me that, but you're probably right. It is local cider.
And Steve, if you really get desperate on it, I can stop over there and I can go leave a note on the hives. I mean, that's also one way to make sure you get a hold of him, is to just go leave a nice big white note on the hives. I'm sure it'll draw his attention.
And where's the hives located? I've not seen this group. Where's it located?
The hives are just southeast on the Snohomish Monroe Road,
Okay.
about a mile, not even that, out of town. There's a big silage bunker, and it's called Dairyland French Creek.
Got it. I think I know what it is. Okay. Yeah, I appreciate it, Ty. I can go. I'll follow up on that. If anybody doesn't have any, then that's great. I was trying to see if the club had anything.
Yeah, the hives, if you're looking for them, they're just on the far side.
Okay.
Let's see, let me make sure. They're on the east side of the silage bunker, and you'll see them laying there.
Monroe Snohomish, or Monroe.
Snow, yeah, and you're very close to Snohomish.
Okay,
Yep.
Sounds good. Thank you, Ty.
Yep. So do you want to mention Oops Paint, Eli? Just anybody?
Yeah, right. Oops paint. Yeah, whatever you want to do with it.
Well, it's just the question was if people cared to. I do. I don't have to paint all the hives because some of them are boiled in wax, but I build a lot of the shims and everything else, and so I paint them, and I paint them using Oops Paint from Home Depot, and I use pastel colors. My daughter happens to like because the hives start looking like big Easter eggs at some point in time. But I have a lot of it, and they charge like $9 a gallon or whatever. But I've ended up with a collection of Oops Paint of these various pastels, and if a bunch of us wanted to get together or something like that and do an evening where bring in your boxes that you pulled off or whatever, and you want to paint them, maybe make some donation to the club or something like that. But I literally have on the order of 30 gallons of this stuff. And so it's got various blues and greens and pinks, and it looks kind of like a beach club type thing, but it makes it fun.
So you bought all that at $9 a gallon?
Yeah.
Okay. You intend to have a lot of hives?
No, because I'll use them for I have bird feeders, and I have different things around the place that I can use it for. But I just wanted to you know, it's like might be something fun for the bee club to do, because if, you know, get a bunch of different colors all at once. Some of it's interior, some of it's exterior.
And especially if you're doing all that insulation. So if people who are painting their hives would also be painting the insulation.
I'm going to be painting the insulation. So I've got exterior. I have 10 gallons, or no, it's not 5 gallons of exterior paint at $30 or whatever, that I'm just going to paint all of the rigid foam, just one big color. And then I'm going to put the coroplast on top of that. And then I put stencils. Then I have stencils that can go on top of the coroplast. So it'll be fun, you know, even with coroplast on, it'll look nice.
So the boiled hives, they did fine through the first winter, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they did fine. Yeah. I mean, worst thing, I might take soap and water and wipe off, you know, the outside of them, but they did really well.
I'm curious as to how many winters they'll last in this climate.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
We'll know. We'll find out.
Yeah.
I think that's all I know.
On one of your slides, you had like a roll of insulation you were talking about. What was that?
So one was Reflectix. That's the smaller one. That's the you know, kind of general one. And this other one that came up was called Smart Shield.
But that looked like it was porous. It didn't look like it was closed still.
Here, I've got it. Sharing. Boom. Put into production mode. And share.
Is there a reason you picked foam insulation versus Reflectix for your trials?
Well, it's just the R value is so much higher. It's R23.
Oh.
That's serious. And then see what type of, you know, see what it does.
I just looked up Reflectix really quick and it was saying R21.
Yeah, well, what's its thickness?
It wasn't
R21 for Reflectix? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and it was like
a lot cheaper.
It was $20 instead of 53.
Yeah, it's a heck of a lot cheaper. I think for sure that'd be. So, yeah. The one thing with that is keeping it. I have to figure out a good way to keep the edges crisp and stuff like that. Maybe some type of reinforcement stick or something to kind of keep the edges and keep it aligned and stuff, so it was tight and taut. You know, where what he used. Let's see where. I'm guessing here 3. Oops, wrong one. Try over here 3. So he was just using bungee cords and stuff like that when he used Reflectix. So you don't have to be fancy. I mean, that was one thing that was really clear about it. So he's not fancy about it. The other thing was really interesting is that he's doing, you know, overwintering in a single box.
And actually he's doing it. Is he still doing it in Westerns?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, he is.
He watches them pretty closely, though. I mean, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm surprised. You know, it was really nice of him and very nice of him to share the information and the pictures and what have you. You know, he clearly wanted to make sure the bees are alive, and they're continuing on. And to Tony's thing, one of the hives has got a really temperamental line of bees, which has, by the way, propagated. Now, instead of just one hive of temperamental bees, I now have 3 hives of temperamental bees. But you know, they're healthy and happy.
Yeah, and those defensive bees are often the most successful. It's just a reversion to wild type, the way I see it.
Yeah.
And we are seeing it more often than we used to tell beginners, oh, you don't know how to handle bees if they had troubles. Now we just accept that they can end up with a nuke or a package that is super defensive.
Yep. And so they get treated last whenever I'm feeding or whatever. They're the last hive.
Yeah, you figure that they would set off a lot of alarm pheromone if you did them first. So that is one of the things that like most everybody does is put that one off. Not because you don't like them, but because why set off so much alarm pheromone?
Yeah, I mean, if they're going to sit there and continue to, the guard bees will stay with me wherever I go in the apiary. That it's not that large of a space, and so they're bouncing off the veil and all this stuff. It's like, yeah, you get last, and then I walk out. It's like, okay, have a good time. I will say that yes, the one thing about these classes was that I spent most of the summer in my bee suit. That was an incredible amount of time.
Yeah, I can see it was a lot of time.
Yeah. And as things go with the learning processes, the only thing about the more you know, the less you know, right?
Yeah.
It's a humbling experience.
Oh, I don't think there's anybody really on here left, but I could use one more volunteer for this Saturday at the Return of the Salmon. The Return of the Salmon celebration in Sultan to stand at the booth. It's a 10 to 4 booth. If you come earlier, you can help set up, and stay later, you can help tear down. But there might be somebody who's from Sultan, would like to do it while they're also getting some service credits. Okay, so email me or call me, text me if you're interested.
All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity, Eli. I appreciate that.
I know
Nice to be able
it
to
was wonderful. It really, I think you ought to get on the speakers list for WASBA. Did you look at that?
I looked at it. I don't know who to contact. Do I just drop a note to WASBA and just say, hey?
Yeah, I think info at would get you there. It's who was it? Name was Houston. I think that was the first name. Huston.
Okay.
The Olson. Yeah, they'll just go to info at wasba.org and they'll route you to the right person. Yeah, I would get on that list, and you could say in person on Zoom. You could set fees if you want fees or whatever. And then who knows? Maybe they'll ask you at the next conference. One of these conferences upcoming.
That'll be interesting. I'd love to. I do. That was an unexpected result, and I was really pleased that appeared. I was really expecting to do more with the cold weather stuff, but I didn't. That wasn't the time window. So, and I am going to, make sure that the small hives, when I'm doing splits and what have you, is that they have the right insulation to start off with until they get big enough. So.
Yeah, and that double nuke thing where you put 2 nukes together to winter, keep 2 queens is based on the same thing. You've got to give them a little heat advantage, a little.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
That's next year's overwintering project. I had my hands full this year, but I will do the figure out how to do overwintering with the small nukes, and so I've got standby bees and stuff like that, and it's a good thing to learn how to do. All right.
Okay, I think people
I'll sign off.
Winding down here.
Yep. Thank you very much. We will see you all later.
Except Wade had a zillion questions that I couldn't answer. That email had so many questions in it. So.
Eli, I was wondering about the conference. Is there like a big group of folks who go down together? I know you guys went last year to the one over on the eastern side of the state.
Yeah, that one was very poorly attended. I don't even know if there were 100 people there. Oh, I should probably at some point stop the recording since we don't need to record all of this. Let's see.